gosh, that's such a surprise. Oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, and cancer are closely linked. This is a really interesting study that they looked at and started examining that link. But this is important. This is important to recognize. We don't want to we want to get this stuff on the front end. So first off, dealing with good probiotics to be able to mitigate the inflammatory cascade that we know is going to end up creating oxidative stress, not only locally, which can cause things like inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, diarrhea, constipation, poor nutrient absorption, but also systemically, where we end up with adrenal issues, thyroid issues, all the way down to cancers and so forth. So why would we use whole foods? Well, I've talked to you guys about this before, but I wanted to put this up for you. This was an interesting study about using cruciferous vegetables for bladder cancer. Just about 48,000 men in health professional follow-up studies. In a retrospective study, so what we did was we looked at people and then examined who had cancer and examined their dietary consumption, and we found that the relative risk for bladder cancer was reduced by 50%, by half. That's what this means here. Relative risk of 1 means there's 100% chance that you're going to get it. A relative risk of 0 means that there's 0%. So just 49%. Relative risk reduction of over half. So you reduce your risk by half by having cruciferous vegetables in your diet in the whole food form. You can't get that through supplements. You can't get that through folate. The p-value over here just lets us know if it's significant. It's very significant, which means that there's only a 0.8% chance that this effect could have happened by chance. For any of you guys who like stats, it's pretty impressive, pretty compelling to eat cruciferous vegetables, if you ask me. Colon cancer. What happens with colon cancer and whole foods? Well, again, take a look at this. This is our relative risk here, and these are our servings per month. Here's your theoretical risk is almost down to 0 as you get over towards 300 servings of broccoli per month. That's a lot. That's a lot of broccoli. But let's just pull it back here a little bit. We're looking. If you just take a few handfuls of broccoli a day, or say every other day, or in this range, you reduce your risk by like 50% by eating raw broccoli. That's crazy. That is crazy. I don't know any like that preventative mechanism is huge. That preventative mechanism's up there with exercise. It's up there with not smoking, stuff like that.
So it was raw, not cooked?
Yeah, it's raw broccoli.
Okay.
Same thing with rectal and colon cancers. These are bladder cancers. These are compelling reasons we can't get this through folate. We can't get this through isolated nutrients. And I know you've heard me. Some of you guys have heard me give this little spiel before, but I do think it's worthwhile because it reflects on MegaFood's principles here. It reflects on the way MegaFood uses its model in which to impart health to its customers. It's that whole foods deliver different nutrient value than when we just use isolated nutrients. This is extremely true here. So what about those reactive oxygen species that are causing all of that inflammatory damage that we talked about at the level of the gut and then systemically from something as simple as leaky gut, which can happen from something as simple as stress? Well, there's different ways that we can tackle this. We can use chemical antioxidants, or we can use indirect antioxidants. The chemical antioxidants being things like ascorbic acid, alpha-tocopherol, beta-carotene, stuff like this. These neutralize free radicals in vitro. So this does a great job in a test tube at dealing with the inflammatory damage that I've created, that I've synthetically created. And unfortunately, though, they're converted to pro-oxidants after donating their electrons. So you get this effect from a few minutes to a few hours at the most in vitro, where you get this antioxidant effect. But it flips its burden to become pro-oxidant. This is what we use, just things like vitamin A's, vitamin C's, or beta-carotenes. This is a direct chemical antioxidant. The indirect antioxidants, well, they don't directly reduce these oxidizing compounds. So when I eat that broccoli, it's not that it actually is going around and sequestering the inflammation that's happening from my leaky gut, or the inflammation that's happening systemically as a result of that. They're not just going around and eating them up. The same way that when I inject glutathione into a patient intravenously, that just goes around and sequesters free radicals and inflammatory damage and tries to help shift the burden away from that inflammation. These don't do it that way. These do it at the level of those genes, and that's why I was on the front end talking about NF-kappa beta, IL-6. Why? Because NF-kappa beta, when you go down that inflammatory cascade, when I eat my sticky bun, or when I end up having stress and creating leaky gut, it triggers this cascade of chemicals in the body, such as NF-kappa beta, IL-6, that then communicate with the genes at the level of the cell, and the cell just goes crazy and starts releasing inflammatory markers, and your mast cells go crazy, and all the rest happens. Indirectly, we do it at the level of the gene. Again, the food, the healthy components get into the gene, and they tell the gene, no, let's just, everybody be cool, there's no reason to get all crazy, we don't need to get down to the Zhuiyin and start rapping and stuff like that. Let's just deal with the inflammatory burden that way. That's how these work indirectly. So initially we had this idea that people who eat more fruits and vegetables have less cancer, heart disease, neurodegenerative diseases, and so forth. And these chronic diseases we decided were associated with these free radicals, this inflammation that's happening that we were talking about. And so certain fruits and vegetables have these good chemical antioxidants in them. So vitamin A, beta carotene, C, E, zinc, selenium. So when we supplement with these, we should be getting this effect, right? Where we're able to sequester and deal with the inflammation that's happening. Well, that's not really how it works. What we found is that it's failed to show any benefit of reducing the risk or outcomes of things like cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and heart diseases and all-cause mortalities and so forth. Well, that's interesting. Where's the evidence for that? This is the ABC trial, where they looked at alpha-tocopherol beta-carotene, and they wanted to see what was its prevention in cancer, because cancer has this huge link, as I just showed you earlier on that one study, that, hey, radical oxidizing species and free radical and inflammatory burden is linked to cancer. So let's use some of these, let's use some antioxidants that we know of. Well, unfortunately, what actually happened was we had a 28% increase in mortality from lung cancer, a 17% increase in all-cause mortality, and a 29% increase in cardiovascular mortality when we started supplementing with these. Huh, that's interesting. Orange juice versus vitamin C. This is a great study to highlight why we would use whole foods as well. So, I kind of blew through that. The ABC trial showed that we had increased, it had no effect on MI or death, and then we went to the CARROT study, which was carotene and retinol, and we showed that we had this increase in death and so forth. That's why. These are supposed to be antioxidants that are helping us. So let's take it a little step further and do a head-to-head comparison here. This was interesting, where we created, we caused free radical oxidative damage to a number of blood cells in the body, and we ended up then putting those damaged blood cells into an environment of blood orange juice, or just vitamin C ascorbic acid, and so, to see what the results were. And so plasma vitamin C concentration increased whether you took the blood orange juice or the C drink. S drink here is just the placebo, it's just a sugar drink, it was just a placebo. So in both the blood orange juice and the vitamin C ascorbic acid drink, you got increased levels of vitamin C. Make sense? Take vitamin C, get vitamin C. So we had increased levels of vitamin C in both cases, but DNA damage significantly decreased 3 hours after the blood orange juice intake, but there was no effect from the ascorbic acid or the sugar drink, which was our placebo control group there. So only the blood orange juice was able to heal and deal with the radical oxidizing species inflammatory damage that was happening. Only the whole food matrix was happening there. Why? Why is that? Why is it that these antioxidants aren't working? Well, there's other components here. There's other components in the whole foods that allows this to take place. So you have these naturally occurring agents called phytoalexins, which are other chemicals, and these were created by plants to protect them against infections and other predators and so forth like that, like viruses and bacteria and parasites and funguses, because the plant has to protect itself as well. Well, we've adapted to these over thousands of years. So when we eat plants, consuming these phytoalexins go into the level of the DNA, and rather than producing this NF-kappa beta, IL-6, NRF2 inflammatory cascade, they go down and communicate when we eat these phytoalexins, which are just these chemicals in the plant's natural antibiotics, and produce things like NRF2 results, and they cause a pathway that activates NRF2 and SIRTs and stuff, and these other guys are just anti-inflammatory. That's how we effectively need to balance inflammation load in the body. That's how we effectively deal with leaky gut in the body, is not through these chemical antioxidants, but through the entire whole food matrix has to be in place for us to get this effect. We see this compelling evidence mounting time and time again that we need to start accepting, and for myself, a really good reason why I think that we should be using Megafood or companies like Megafood in this whole food process on a more regular basis. I think that Megafood fits a very important role in the market of supplementation. It plays a very important role. So, as I said, these are just toxic compounds that are like biopesticides, the plant's own pesticide mechanism here. So these certain phytochemicals can be toxic or carcinogenic when in high doses and studied, but cancer preventatives, dealing with free radical oxidative damage in low doses. Who remembers that word? Hormesis? You guys remember me talking about the hormetic dose relationship that exists? So these polyphenolic phytochemicals, are really what's providing this oxidative protective effect, and it doesn't do it directly. We can't look at it through the lens like, hey, this has X amount of value, in vitro, and we need to just get a product into the blood system that's going to go around sequester the inflammatory damage. We need to be able to use the whole food. We can't just start isolating pieces out. And of course, that really is that's really the moniker of Megafood here. Is to be able to do that. So, why is that important? It's important because of this, because of the way that it is able to deal with not only the systemic but local inflammation at the level of the gut and in the level of the entire body, reducing all of this inflammatory burden that's happening here through things like whole food supplementation. This is exactly what that is. This is just a liquid chromatography slide where we're looking at the whole food complex. If I just use the ascorbic acid, it just might be this one component or this component. But all of these different phytochemicals, these are just different phytochemicals. Every peak represents a different phytochemical that have an important role in dealing with that inflammation. This is why Megafood is extremely important for us, I think, to be able to use with our patients and with our clients and so forth. Because not only do we get a better effect, as I'm trying to highlight here through some of the studies I'm talking about, but we're also doing the benefit of potentially reducing harm by using products that we know actually almost counterintuitively produce inflammatory damage. We don't want to further the inflammatory burden in the body, but we can do that if we offer supplements that are just simply fall into the categories of alpha-tocopherols, beta-carotenes, and so forth like that, as I've been trying to highlight through those studies. This is that hormetic relationship. This is why it works. This is a dose relationship. It's all about getting it into the right dose, the right dosing sweet spot. If we take these phytoalexins and these biopesticides in high doses, it does cause inflammatory burden for us. But in the right range, we reduce our risk of diseases. Our relative risk decreases. This is the sweet spot that happens right here. This is why Megafood's great. It's not about mega dosing our vitamin A's or our vitamin C's or our zincs and so forth. It's about getting it in the sweet spot where we know that the body responds. That's what those studies are that I was highlighting with are telling us. It's not about more is better. It's not that we just need these extracts and need to add more of them, or that we're not adding enough. It's that we need them in the right amount. And we need to look at dosing in a different way as well. And Megafood makes us rearrange our paradigm to do that. It makes us say, why is it that Megafood works so well, and yet we're using lower doses of this whole vitamin C or this zinc product in here? It's because it's in its whole food form. It's because that whole food form with all of those phytoalexins and other chemicals that are part of that entire whole food end up fitting into this sweet spot. If I don't use enough, I don't decrease my relative risk as much as I could, but if I use too much and I just isolate those USP nutrients, my relative risk goes back up again. Does that make sense? Sorry, and when I said relative risk earlier, I misspoke. When I said that 1 means you have a 100% chance, what I meant to say is that you can have a relative risk greater than 1 as well, as this graph is highlighting here. It means that if you had a relative risk of 2, you have 2 times the chance of getting that, or relative risk of 3 or something like that. Or 2 is a 100% rather, 100% more chance of getting it, or 1.5 is 150% like a 1.5 times more likely to get whatever disease we're talking about, or 2 is 2, and 0.5 is the other direction. 50% reduction. Does that make sense? I didn't lose you with the numbers there? No? Because they work both ways. I can say 100% if we go from 1 to 2, or I can also say just, well, doesn't matter. Who cares, right? That has nothing to do with this. But I just wanted to correct myself from before if I didn't explain that well enough. So this is really interesting. And very lastly, I just wanted to point out this phantom risk line. This phantom risk line talks about what our hypothetical risk is here. This is, if I take my antioxidants like my vitamin A, theoretically, the more I take, your phantom risk is just your likely risk that something is going to happen. But what we see is that in reality it changes. It changes based on the dosing. It's not implicit. It's not intuitive, so to speak. We have to look outside of that old paradigm that we thought was rational and say it's not. There's different ways that this is happening. So this is important. Very, very quickly here, because mega food, it's you got to make sure that you end up with the right end product. It's nice that we talk about whole foods, and absolutely go out and eat your whole foods, but we oftentimes need to augment our diet. We oftentimes need to have a concentrated whole food supplement to be able to specifically address the adrenal glands, or specifically address the thyroid, or specifically address the immune system to stabilize mast cells. And of course, I just brought this slide up. We know what's going on here, I'm sure, because we've talked about mega food before. The slow food process, this gentle drying process that's happening here. This ensures that we end up with the highest quality at the end of the day in our tablet, and that obviously is of ultimate importance. Mega Food has invested millions of dollars into this technology because they believe so firmly that the end product, the quality of that end product, translates into the health benefits that we want with our clients. That's somewhat obvious, but they're really under the mindset, they're really within that paradigm, they're really invested in making sure that that is their primary focus, not just simply the economic side of it. I love that about the company, that they have that focus, because of course this is just showing us that we get this great nutrient retention when we use this fancy drying process that Mega Food has invested millions of dollars in, and of course this is the only whole food supplement company that employs it. So it's not only about these whole foods and stuff, it's about what is that end quality as well, and I just want to leave you with that there is a necessity to make sure that all the things I'm talking about end up in that whole food capsule, that all of the components of the plant are there in the right doses, and that we're not losing things like carotenes by using other drying methods. And of course, or whatever it is, tablet making methods, or whatever part of the process that could diminish the quality along the way. Of course, Mega Food adheres to the highest standards to ensure that we do end up with the most concentrated medicinal end product in our end tablet. There we go. That's Mega Food for you. Thank you guys very much for being here this morning.